All right. Hello, home service pros, and welcome to the Battle Plan Marketing Podcast, episode number 63. Today, we have a special guest on the show, Randy Zechman, founder, owner, and Mischief Executive Officer at Clean Solar in San Jose, California. Randy's a serial entrepreneur and started Clean Solar from scratch in 2007. Today, it's the most highly rated solar installation company in the Bay Area of California, and one of just a few thousand certified B corporations in the entire USA. They're also the most highly rated solar installer in the world on Yelp, and named one of the fastest growing solar installers in the US by Inc. 5000, and one of the top 3 residential installers in the country by Solar Power World. Randy's going to talk about what it takes to succeed in the solar business and create a team fully committed to serving both the customer and the community the best that it can. Listen to how Randy and his company connects and shares their success with their local community. He also discusses his outlook on solar energy in California and its struggle with the public utility companies. So stay tuned for a great interview, and hopefully you'll pick up some valuable nuggets along the way that can help your service business.
Welcome to the Battle Plan Marketing Podcast for contractors. Get actionable advice and tactics on how to grow your home service company, plus interviews with industry experts dropping value bombs in marketing, sales, and operations. And now, let's power up your home service biz with your host, Mark Ambrose of Battle Plan Marketing.
All right. Welcome to the podcast, Randy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on the show today. So let's dive right in. Tell us what you do now, who you do it for, where you do it, and how your company helps them.
So I'm the founder and CEO for Clean Solar. We're mostly a residential solar installation company. We do some commercial, but 95% of our work is residential. We focus on kind of the higher end market. We're a highly rated company. We let some of the other big marketers in the space like Tesla and Sunrun and those folks drive customers to solar. And then when they dig in and realize that maybe those companies might struggle with customer service a little bit, they typically end up in our laps. And I also the founder of a company called Clean Roofing, where that does we have a sister company that kind of works together since roofing and solar kind of go together.
Yeah, because there's roofing done on many solar jobs, right? So laying down new paper or whatever. Do you also get into the Tesla roofs, the actual PV roof tiles?
So we were one of the first authorized dealers to do that. We've actually done more tear-offs and weatherproofing of those type of roofs than maybe any other roofer. And we've done the back end, the electrical work, but doing all the job ourselves. We're just starting to get into that. So we've done kind of both ends, back and front end with that product, and have worked with Tesla for a couple years in that process.
So were you working with not just Tesla, but other solar installers where you would do the electrical?
Yeah, exactly. So with Tesla sells some of them themselves and does some of their own installs, and some of them they hire out third party to do stuff. What they also do is allow mainly roofers to go and sell the product and install it. And because roofers don't have the electrical trade, then they reach out to an electrician to do the electrical part. And we've been a good partner in that sense because we're a solar company that understands both the roofing and the solar side of it. So we've been a good partner for roofers as opposed to just hiring an electrician and him not understanding he or she not understanding the pieces in between, right? The connection between.
Right. And AC versus DC, right?
Yep.
Different electric world as well. So that's nice. That gets you referral business from a bunch of roofers, perhaps, on other solar business that's not Tesla roofs, yes?
Yeah, it's opened up other relationships, right? And anytime you're out there doing business with folks, as long as you do a good job, it helps in the long run. And knowing more folks in the space that aren't focused on a particular trade is always a good thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, great. So let's talk like solar leases, power purchase agreements, purchasing. Do you offer all 3? Do you recommend one over the other for most of your clients? How's that working?
This is an interesting space. The short answer is we do about 90% of our business is on a cash basis and about 10% is financed. Solar leases and PPAs are essentially the same thing. PPAs are just reverse engineered leases is all they really are. And so we hardly do any of those anymore because the math on just doing loans is better now than leases and PPAs, although that wasn't the case 5 or 6 years ago. And so the interesting part, though, is when I started the business 15 years ago, I started it under the auspices of the first so many years, maybe 5-ish years, you would get the new adopters to an industry. And those folks typically have money, and those folks are typically going to pay for things in cash. But then eventually you, on that bell curve of customers, you get to the point where you start to get average consumers. And that's where businesses really take off, is when you get to that level, right?
Right.
And so those customers typically don't have a bunch of money. And so then financing was going to be important. So the whole reason to start the business actually was to do the financing piece of it, because I thought that was going to be the driving force long term. So much so that I went out there and I contacted probably 20 different entities to try to start our own financing entity.
Wow.
So from VC investors to angel investors to community banks to regular banks. We looked at just some third-party financiers. I actually even looked at some folks that do kind of high interest dollar loans. They do like short-term financing stuff. I talked to all these folks out there and was unsuccessful in getting our own platform to do it. And so then we just started. I've probably talked to every financing entity in the space over the past 15 years because I've been interested in it. And the odd thing about all of that, I kind of pride myself to be a pretty good business guy. I've been an entrepreneur in lots of industries, actually. That it's the one thing that the kind of the core of the business I thought where we would go that I've never been able to figure it out. And we've never even been average at it. Like we've always been under the industry when they were doing 50% financing. We were still at 10%. So it's been interesting for us. And so the conclusion to that long story, my take on it is because we sit in the space we do as a brand where we've become very highly rated, that the customers that just come to us aren't the average Joe customer. It's the customer that does a little more research. And those customers seem to typically have a little more money and they end up paying cash for things.
Gotcha. Wow, that's interesting. Do you think part of it is in your location? You're in the Bay Area, so it's a higher income area. Is that playing a role?
Yeah, for sure. So statistically, financing in solar is lower in the Bay Area than it is in other parts of, even in Southern California, actually. But we've still been under those averages for 15 years, right?
Oh, that's great. Well, you came at it a shoot targeting that type of client, did great work, got highly rated, and word of mouth referral business spread. That's what it sounds like to me on the outside looking at. Yes?
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing about entrepreneurism at the end of the day, right? We can lay the greatest plans, and yet we're still hostage to just what happens in the industry and have to adapt to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is survival of he or she who adapts, right? Not the fittest, really. He or she who adapts to the environment. So that's interesting. A little side note there. So all those finance companies, no one was interested in solar financing, which blows me away a little bit. There's an asset that's semi-retrievable. It's a little difficult because it's attached to the house, I guess. What was their great hesitancy, would you say? Was there a common denominator amongst the reluctance to get into that field?
The core of it is low risk profile for the unknown. And so financing entities, they don't look at logic. So the logic was, hey, if you're not going to pay a bill, the first bill you're always going to pay is your mortgage, and the second's going to be your utility bill. Those are going to be the two you're always going to pay. And so the default rate on those are just going to be less than with cars, for instance. And so they were trying, because the conversation always went to the car space because the dollar amounts are similar.
I see.
And so they would always start to use numbers in that space and start looking at default rates and then looking at the retrievability of the product.
Right.
Where with cars, easier than with this. I think what ended up happening was you saw companies like Tesla and Sunrun who ended up starting their own financing, right? And they kind of proved the market, hey, the default rates are really low. Then other finances got in there because now it was a known entity and they had numbers they could put in. We know they're at like 3.2% or whatever the default rate was, right?
Right. I see. Nobody wanted to be the pioneer. I think I heard it on Shark Tank. Damon. Pioneers get shot and settlers come in later and settle. So they want to be the settler, not the pioneer. They don't want that risk. So California, you're in California, and up there in the Northern California, you actually have more power outages than we have here in the South, more fires. So has power outages made battery storage systems very popular in your area?
So the seasonal business of batteries is certainly higher as you approach the fire season. the first power outage that occurs or the first fire that happens somewhere near the area that you're doing business in, phones ring off the hook. So we had all the fires that were close to the Bay Area. We were getting 8 times the amount of calls we would normally, like one day over the next. It was the next day that this happened. So for sure, and the downside to all that is there's lots of logistical issues with batteries now with the availability of them, which we can go into details on that if you'd like. But coupled on top of that, it's a new industry. And so because it's a new industry, there's lots of city and county jurisdictional naivete that causes delays and causes bad decisions to be made during all that process. And it delays.
I see.
And so if the first fire breaks out and now you want to solve that problem, you're 6 months away from solving that problem at the end of the day, right? So now you're into the next fire season. And in America, we don't have a whole lot of tolerance for waiting 6 months for something I want now.
Right. So the local jurisdictions and the permitting process, naive to battery storage, therefore delaying the approval process, the engineering process, coming back to you, asking you about drawings and all that. Yes.
Yeah. And in fairness, right, it's new to everyone.
Right.
So we're more likely to make a mistake on batteries than solar. We've been doing solar for 15 years. So, and the jurisdiction's job is to safeguard. So that process is good overall. But the downside of the process is slower movement and a conservatism that often leads to kind of silly concerns.
Gotcha. And there are a lot of different kind of products out there, right? So you have dry cell, you have gel cell, you have lithium. So you mentioned manufacturing difficulties. Is that due to COVID, that we have shutdowns and it's difficult to get product, or other causes?
Yeah, that's the main issue today. But if you look at kind of historically over the past couple years, it's this, we went from wanting 2 batteries a month to now we needed 100 batteries a month, and multiply that by thousands of contractors. And so you've got manufacturers that traditionally in the solar space have not done a very good job of understanding demand, base demand off of previous and not future. And there's obvious reasons that that occurs. And so when you've got hockey stick growth in an industry, and batteries are certainly that,
yes,
manufacturing, no matter the occasion, is going to struggle to keep up with it. So you're going to have delays.
Yeah.
And then you pour gas on that fire, being now there's COVID and now there are actual fires that are causing more demand than would even be normal. You now get this issue of more problem. And so the realism for us is I would buy tomorrow 400 batteries, and I can get 400 batteries total, and I can get about 20 a quarter.
Wow.
That's the delta we're talking about right now. So it's significant.
Yeah, that's very significant. Crazy. And each year, the fires seem to be getting worse in California here the last few years. So each year, that demand, like you say, hockey stick growth, it's probably exponentially growing from one year over the next, just the demand.
Yeah, and just regionally here, our best marketer is PG&E. PG&E runs ads on television that says we're going to shut off your power.
Right.
They run PSPS advertisements, right? Like,
yeah,
it's so crazy that in the world we live in now, that the one source that provides power, the monopoly, says, sorry, we're going to turn off your power.
Yeah.
And so from my perspective, I feel like I owe PG&E a Christmas present every year for all the business they send our way because of that.
Exactly. Do most energy storage customers have or want solar in conjunction with it, or do some simply charge with utility power in off-peak periods and then have that back up as an emergency?
Well, we always tie batteries to solar.
Okay.
So we're not feeding the battery from the grid.
From the grid. Okay.
Yes, always have an alternative source of power to power that battery or generator or whatever it might be, right? And so since we're a solar company, it's always solar with us. Our sales mix is generally, it's a third battery only, it's a third solar only, and it's a third combo together.
I see.
And those splits of a third and a third are, those battery customers are now those are the early adopters from solar that are now adding on batteries.
Gotcha. Are there any systems you recommend over others, or should we leave that out of the conversation, allow for growth and change and all that?
Yeah, the battery market's just complex. So electrically, it's way more complex than solar is.
It is, right.
And so there's lots of ways to do it. From a simple perspective, you've got AC and DC, right? And how you want to couple it. If you go with an AC coupled system, like a Tesla system would be, then you can plug that into any existing solar system. The downside is you might be doing 2 inversions, so they're a little less efficient.
Right.
So we're talking a couple percentage points, and that typically doesn't matter as much in a complex sale. Where DC is more efficient, but now you can only plug them into certain situations. So if you got 100 customers calling you a day, now you have to really kind of mine through, okay, this customer I can plug with this battery and this customer I can plug with this battery. And it just becomes complex when you have so many other things you're trying to do.
Yeah. Plus you have load calculations, right? It's not like you're just replacing their electric bill. It's like, well, batteries are expensive. And what's your essential loads? What can you not do without? And that differs for everybody. Might have medical equipment, might run a business out of the house, maybe a shop out of the house. Who knows, right? So you guys have to do load counts before you do battery. Part is your battery sizing, correct?
Yes, we do it as a battery sizing on the front end. That's done by sales, which are generally non-technical people, right? And so you kind of do a good job at it, not a great job. And then after you sell it, you send out the more detailed folks to do the more detailed components of it. Customers don't realize what really is happening here. So if I said, hey, Mark, go look in your service panel right now and tell me on a particular breaker, every single thing that powers. You probably couldn't tell me what it is. Like, power the plug that the blender is attached to, or where is that? Consumers just don't know that. And I own a solar company and can barely tell you in my home, with that. And so it then requires a lot of effort. That is literally, let's turn on everything, including your blender, and then just start flipping switches and write down everything that goes off, right? And it's a pretty laborious process.
Wow. Yeah.
And coupled on top of that, you have to think about where the service panels are. And if you don't have a service panel where all your breakers are outside and those are in your pantry or in your kitchen or in a closet or something, are you really going to break into there, pull out 3 or 4 breakers and move those through the house and tear out drywall and try to figure out how to get into attics and, all that kind of stuff, which can be really complicated. So now you're dealing with, you might only want to back up the refrigerator and the internet, but you're going to back up half the house because that's where the subpanel sits.
Right. I see. Yeah. So you're creating subpanels in some instances, it sounds like.
Yep. In all situations, you create a load center, right? So you're going to have a controlled load center that you're going to have to connect to.
Is there not a device that you can hook up to your service panel? Forgive me, I'm not an electrician, but I kind of remember a device where you could put leads on your service panel, which would then measure where your loads were going. Yes?
Yes, they're called CTs is what they're called. And so they're rings, essentially, you put around wires and it tells that. But it's a more complicated way of doing it, really. And it's just telling you load coming through. So is that load coming through because you're running the microwave or because you're watching the TV, right?
Oh, it doesn't know yet what appliances are being used.
It just tells you the amount of load coming through that particular breaker.
Oh, I see. So yeah. Not the best source of information data then. Our audience are home service companies, solar companies, many among them. So let's talk about how do you create recurring revenue in the solar business? Is that attainable at all? Do you do monitoring service agreements or panel washing service agreements? Is there any way to create recurring revenue in the solar industry?
The short answer is yes. And it's through some of the things that you mentioned. Service agreements and panel washing are 2 common ones. The longer answer really is, though, that it's difficult, and it's difficult for multiple reasons. The main thing is, philosophically, what solar does is it comes in and it says, get this thing that only has value to you by lowering a monthly bill. And so since many customers pay for that up front, they go, okay, well, I've got a 7-year payback or a 5-year payback or whatever the payback is. Or even if they finance it, they're saving $10, $20, maybe $100 a month for someone who's got a really big bill. And then if you, on top of that, you say, oh, and we can do this service agreement on top of it, and that's now $100 a month or $50 a month or whatever it is, it's now taking away those savings, right? So that makes that process tougher.
Yes, that motivation is withdrawn almost, diluted.
Yeah. And so the one thing I would say, though, is people do want their panels cleaned, and there is a return on investment for panel cleanings. But the tough part about that business is when you're selling a product that's generally $20,000, and now you're also trying to sell a product that is $300 to go wash panels. How much time are you going to spend on that portion of it? You kind of have to split the businesses. One has to operate as a really small business, and the other one has to operate as a medium or large size business. It makes it tough within a business itself.
Yeah, I agree. Even the monitoring service, right? So there's small dollar amounts, there's small margins versus a very high dollar amount and good margins on the sales and installation side. I bring it up because on the marketing side, staying in contact with existing customers is something most companies fail to do. And it's a really bad business practice, right? To ignore them. They've already come to know, like, and trust your business enough to pull the trigger and do business with you. And now we just leave them behind, especially in the solar business. Out of all the home service companies, solar is sort of a one and done. We install it. We make sure everything's working, and then you leave. And even the homeowner doesn't really see it every day. They just see a lower bill, right? They're not actually physically using like a car or an appliance or something. So it's a little dangerous in that respect. Do you do any like email newsletter? Are there other things you do to stay connected to your existing clients?
One of the things we've done on and off through the years, just frankly done a little bit on time availability. So what a good practice is, and we've actually had good success. I don't know about great success because a little of that type of marketing with customers, there's a little bit of faith in it because it doesn't often generate the lead the next day, right? So there's just faith in that. But reaching out to customers at their true up bill time, and we know when that is. And so you reach out to them, and if you're monitoring their system, you know the system's working, and we do production guarantees. So you can also, on top of that, go, hey, congratulations. You saved yourself, your solar system saved you this amount of money. And oh, by the way, your system's producing more than we anticipated, which is the whole point of the production guarantee. So it's a good feeling. So that's a good practice to do that. You'll see a percentage of people that kind of come back and say, oh, yeah, that's right. My neighbor is now thinking about solar. Let me go talk to them. You see a little bit of that trickle in over the weeks and months afterwards.
Yeah, very nice. I like that. I like going back on that annual true update and showing them what it's done and how it's performed. That's great. Plus, it's a great opportunity to create a case study, I guess, as well. Testimonial, maybe a video testimonial, or even lay out and get into detail of a case study before and after solar 1 year later. This is what it looks like. Okay, so California, I believe it was last year, 2020, January, correct me if I'm wrong, the state passed a law that all new home construction had to include solar PV on every house. So how has that affected your business? Do you go after home builders, or has that trickled into the average home owner? Has that helped your business at all?
So those markets, from a home builder standpoint, you've got the big home builders like KB Homes as an example, and they just cookie cutter build lots. And then you've got, on the other extreme, you've got the custom home builder that might build 1 to 10 houses a year. So the KB Homes model is typically going to be satisfied by the big solar companies, the Teslas, the Sunruns, the SunPowers. Those guys are going to go into that lane and fill that market for lots of reasons. For the local contractor like ourselves, you're really going after the local home builder, right? And so you develop those relationships over the years, which we have, and we have knocked on those doors since. And I'd say a few interesting things. One is less than half of them even know that this exists.
Is that right?
Yeah.
The home builder?
Yeah.
The home builder? Wow.
Every day more know about it, right? Because as you build something and the jurisdiction says, hey, that thing needs solar on it.
Right.
But very little knew about it leading into it, right? I'm sure the KB Homes did.
Right. The big guys, right.
But the little ones did not because they have so many other things that they're juggling. And so the interesting part about it is when you're dealing in that space, you then need all the jurisdictions to be up to speed on this jurisdiction. And they're not. And they don't make it happen. I have 2 houses that are being built about 6 houses away from me, right by my house. I went and stuck a sign, a clean solar sign, right outside where they were building. I'm like, these folks are going to need solar on their building. And sure enough, Buildings done. They have been built for a year and no solars on it. They haven't been done for a year. They've probably been done for 6 months, but they started building after this was in place and no solar on it. So the jurisdictions and right next to it, they're now building another property, getting ready to put Spanish tile on it. Doesn't look like they're going to have solar either on it. So the jurisdictions need to enforce it. And there's no one really telling the jurisdictions to do that. And the only people that can really do that are the trade organizations. So like in solar, it would be in California, it'd be CALSA, the California Solar and Storage Association, to do that. And they're battling so many other things with PG&E, which I think we might get into on this conversation, that how much time do they really have to deal with the hundreds, it's literally hundreds of jurisdictions just in California. And so what their response is, hey, you go say something, contractor. If you know it's happening, tell the jurisdiction. But it's really a bad position to put a contractor in because you're trying to be nice to them, right? You don't want to call them out on stuff that they don't want to be called out on.
Right. Yeah. Well, the jurisdiction, if they're not informing the builder, like your Spanish tile roof example. So he builds the house and finds out afterwards that, maybe you can't even sell this house. I'm not sure how the rules are until you put solar. So now you lost your opportunity before the drywall and everything to run your conduit, your junction boxes, everything you need to run internally before you put that roof on, before you put the drywall on. So now he's got a pretty big repair job to do, right? Go back in, additional costs. Now those costs are probably double or triple what they would have been.
Yeah. And so because of that, and because we're still early days on all of this, and early days, I always consider 2 or 3 years as early days on anything like this, the boom has been muted for sure. Right? Like we see a little more business. We're doing a little more work on new construction. We had talked about developing a whole division and managing it because it's very different doing a new home than it is doing a retrofit. That's a very different process. And you need some volume to start a whole division to do that.
Right. And if it's just a custom home builder, he's got 1 to 5 homes or something usually that they're building. So that volume that you speak of, the KB volume, that's being handled directly by the solar manufacturer.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so you touched on utility companies. They're in the business of selling electricity, generating and selling electricity through the grid. They have monopolies, or they've had monopolies for however long, almost a couple hundred years. And now here comes a third-party product, solar PV panels that people can put on their houses and pretty much stop buying most of their product from the utility companies. So if you're a utility company, you look at solar as competing product and not friendly to your business. And so they have not been friendly to solar, correct? What's the obstacle? And they have a lot of power because the bill. So if I'm a homeowner and I have solar on my house, I am still connected to the grid, to the utility company grid, and I'm still paying them a little bit of monthly thing. I've seen in some states, they try to raise that monthly minimum. And then you have net energy metering where my solar system produces too much electricity in a day, sends it to the grid. I get a credit, or maybe I don't get a credit. That's a war they're fighting, right? So talk about the utility wars that are going on. How do you see the future of solar when you got these giant utility companies in your way?
Yeah, this is a super complex issue. If I think about it from a big picture standpoint, solar's here to stay at this point. And so from a big picture standpoint, there's no doubt that next year we'll have more solar than this year. In 10 years, we'll have more. We're going to have to get to a certain level of renewable energy on the grid, or else we've got catastrophic issues with global warming. And how fast that happens is certainly debatable, but certainly seems like it is going to happen faster than we want to believe it's going to happen. The solar industry is in a good shape long term. The problem is that the herky-jerkiness of it, right? And most contractors can't survive for a year when laws and hurdles get put into place that need to work themselves out sometimes, you can literally have a cliff drop off of sales. as the utilities have fought this, they've gotten smarter in their fight. Their original fight was always pretty silly and pretty extreme, and politicians who really can only absorb little pieces of information on a lot of industries and space could very quickly get the fact that, no, this doesn't seem right, and shoot down whatever the utilities are trying to do. But they've gotten smarter, and they're big, and they're smart companies. You usually don't get to be billions of dollars of a company without being an intelligent company of some sort. And so for all the reasons you mentioned, they see an existential threat. And so the interesting part, though, is that solar is one of the most popular industries in the world. There's not a lot bad to say about it, and consumers really stand up for it. It's the poster child for saving global warming, right? It's not the only thing, right? But it's the poster child for it. So we have all of that going for us. So in the interim, as the utilities do these little things, it potentially causes a lot of problems. And so specifically, I'll name one, and I'm happy to get into a few things that they're doing that's pretty underhanded. And I guess what I'd also add is, if we rewind 15 years ago, the local utility, PG&E, was actually pretty solar friendly. If you went into their headquarters, they had wind farm pictures and solar panel pictures. You'd have thought they were a renewable energy company if you walked into PG&E headquarters, literally. And they kind of saw us as this kind of little child, and they'd give us a sucker and tell us to go away, right? And then it got to be a certain point, and they were like, uh-oh, right? And the ball started rolling. So the big entity right now that we're trying to battle is what's going to happen with net energy metering. Most people don't know what net energy metering is. So it's a good battle to fight if you're utility trying to cloud the environment. So what that essentially means is net energy metering is what happens when the meter spins backwards, right? What happens with those kilowatts and the dollars associated with that kilowatt, with those kilowatts. 4 or 5 years ago, we had retail net metering. So that meant that whenever the meter spun backwards, the utility would have to pay whoever, the consumer, for the same amount that if the meter was spinning forward. We now have net energy metering 2.0, where there's essentially about a 10% tax on that meter now. They put a couple cent tax on it. So when the meter spins forward and backwards, it gets paid. And the math still makes sense with that. But what most people don't realize is when that battle was fought 4 or 5 years ago on net energy metering 2, the CPUC, which is the decision maker for all of this, which, by the way, they're not elected officials, they're appointed officials, so they're less consumer driven. You can't lobby them like you can politicians, right? So those folks make all these decisions, and they go out to the industry and say, hey, tell us what you think net energy metering 2 should be like, just like they're doing now for net energy metering 3. So what happened then was the utilities said there should be an 80% tax. And it was so egregious what they said, the CPUC came back and said, we're even going to go less than what the solar industry thinks the tax should be, because you're not putting in a serious offer for what net energy metering 2.0 should be. So they really slapped their hands pretty hard. And then they said to the solar industry, you guys essentially need to figure out batteries, because net energy metering will have to change. And the solution is really batteries. So if you're a believer in karma, you'd say, fires happening is helping batteries get adopted. We need to have batteries on the grid. It helps with all of this. It helps get us away from a centralized utility that doesn't have consumers' best interest in hand. And they continue to prove that over and over again. And so the trick is, can we make sure that when net energy metering 3.0 comes out, that it's not hugely penal? And if it goes to a 50% tax, right, if it's 15 cents of your 30 cents that you're paying for a kilowatt hour here in the Bay Area, then solar makes no sense unless you get batteries at that point. And then now your cost to do it is just doubled, and the sales will literally drop off a cliff face. We'll go from employing 55 people to employing 5 or 10 if that happens. But if it's done reasonably and it's maybe another 10% tax or something, it goes from 2 cents to 4 cents or 5 cents or something like that. And by the way, I'm oversimplifying all this because there's lots of levers attached to net metering, but that's the simple part of it. Then business will continue growth and consumers can continually buy things that will make sense for everyone to continue to buy solar. And it's ultimately good for our planet and for every citizen living on Earth.
Yeah, exactly. As you said earlier, the savings typically for a homeowner is 50 to a couple $100 a month, depending on the size of the system and their consumption. So if the utility is able to cut that drastically in half, well, then the $50 a month savings is 25. Do I really want to bother with all that stuff going on and commit myself for years on something that saves me $25 a month? So it's a war that where they see they can drastically impact how many people convert over. On the other flip side, like you said, karma, because of their heavy-handedness, the utility companies, and underhandedness even, I see a future where they're driving more and more people to a solar battery storage solution simply to get away. Forget the fires and the brownouts, power outs, just to get away from the utility company. You literally can choose to disconnect your meter at that point if you were sized properly. Do you see that coming in the future? Maybe so many battery systems and people actually disconnecting from the grid?
Will people disconnect? Sure. But that's not the future of what happens. We need to have a grid, and the grid serves as the ultimate backup battery. And so the goal here is not to cut everyone off from the grid. And most of the batteries you install now are not off-grid systems. They're on-grid systems. That's where all the movement is. And so the real take here is let's have an entity like a utility. Utilities still need to exist. Let's have them manage the lines and the wires and minimize the fires, right? And minimize all the stuff that happens and have them control all of that. And then let's get our power from renewable energy and store it in batteries, or there's other tools out there that you can store things in. And let's do that because that's a smarter way to even out how energy is used, right? And so there's a thing called a duck curve that most people don't know about, but it leads to essentially, without going into great detail, although I'm happy to explain a duck curve because it is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar. Please do.
Okay. What the duck curve is, if you picture a duck and the tail of a duck is off the ground and the belly kind of goes down towards the ground and then the head comes up. Before solar became popular, this was essentially what the energy usage in the country looked like. What the need for energy looked like was a bell curve. In the morning, the energy was low, and then throughout the day, it would go up. And then at the peak of the day was 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, air conditionings were on. And then at the end of the day, it would come off. This is what it looked like. Then when solar started to become popular, it started to become to look like the tail of a duck, where in the middle of the day, you had so much solar that the need for brown power was so far down that you didn't need as much brown power during the middle of the day, but you needed it at the end of the day. So the head of the duck coming up at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, that's when the peak of energy was now needed.
I see. Yep, it shifted.
Yep. And so the problem is, and the reason the duck curve is an analogy is, what happens when the belly of the duck hits the ground? Which means that you've got more solar power on the grid than you need, right? And so what the answer to the question is, that energy gets buried, it gets unused. And what utilities would have to do is to turn off some of the solar farms that they're literally paying money for. And so you don't want that to occur. And the solution is you take the power then and you dump it into a battery that then gets discharged. It raises the belly of the duck, lowers the head of the duck, and now you've got this straight line usage. So as a society, a straight line usage of energy, whether it's 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon, is ideal, and batteries help you get to that point.
Interesting. So solar and batteries are actually friendly to the utility company as well. Instead of these massive power requirements in the peak day, that is drastically reduced with the combination of solar and batteries. So that's awesome. So yeah, I can see the straight line is friendly for everybody.
This is the ironic part of it all, right? Is that batteries are actually good. So the utility really can't say bad things about batteries, because what it stops them from doing is having to build another peak power plant. It stops them from having to do that. And so it's good. And yet the thing they fear is the more that gets stored in a battery, the less you need power in the moment. And so PG&E a little bit acts like the drug dealer, right? They want you to want your power now. And all they really care about is making the margin from what the power they're buying and selling it to the consumer. That's all they really care about. And batteries do take away from that a bit in overall power.
Right. Well, so it's fair in the NEM, net energy metering world, for the utility to discount the power they're receiving from overproduction from a residential solar system in order to pay for the grid, in order to start burying some of the power lines that are causing fires. In wooded areas, there shouldn't be exposed lines. They should be buried lines, right? They've been saying that for years. And if I go back in my head, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so ago, I've been in Southern California for 30-something years. Before solar was really big and popular, we were having utility power outages kind of regularly every summer. And that has seemed to have decreased, at least here in the South. That's not due to a fire or something. I don't remember even having a power outage now in the last 5+ years here in SoCal, Edison territory. Of course, up north, it's different. You got forests, you got fires, you got utility fires. And so they're cutting off power as a preventive measure to not cause fires on hot or windy days and things like that. Trees falling down, breaking lines and things like that. Okay, I was on your site, Randy, and I saw that you are a certified B Corporation. Can you explain what that means and who issues that certification? I found that very interesting.
Yeah. This I would say is one of the things we're most proud of, actually. And hardly anybody knows what a B Corp is. There's only a couple thousand of them in the world. I think there's about 3,000 of them now. And B Corp is a literal designation like a C Corp or an S Corp. And the certification is given by B Lab. So it's a separate entity that certifies companies can be a B corporation. So the core of this is there's kind of 4 pillars to being a B corporation. And we've been one now for about 4 or 5 years, I think, maybe a little bit longer. And the 4 pillars for that are you have to do exceedingly well in 4 categories. One of them is sustainability practices, which is easy for a solar entity considering the space we're in. The second one is philanthropic giving. And so we donate $250 for every job that we do to the charity of a customer's choice. So we kind of naturally do that. The third one is treating your employees well. And that is judged multiple ways, some of which is with benefits and some of which is pay. So you have to be in the upper, I think it's 30 or 40 percentile in pay. You have to give a certain amount of benefits. You basically have to be in the upper echelon of your industry as it pertains to employees, employee treatment, and employee benefits. And then the fourth one is community involvement. So this is, what do you do within the industry? Are you just a self-contained entity that's just making money and maybe taking care of your customers, maybe not? Or are you involved in a community? So it's things like, I'm a Rotarian, so that's the largest service entity in the world, Rotary is. And so it's like projects like that where we help build a park, a playground essentially for handicapped children in our neighborhood. And it's the largest one west of the Mississippi. Our Rotary built it and Clean Solar helped to do some things involved with that. So that's just an example of community involvement. So you have to score a certain score. There's literally a score. It's a lot of effort to fill out the application and to apply for it. 1 in every 14 companies that applies actually gets in. And most companies have to change some practices, like they get a score back and they might score high in 3 of the 4, and maybe they don't give enough philanthropically. So now they have to donate more money. And so we were fortunate we didn't have to change any practices and we're able to become a B corporation. And I've really found, I've told this story to a lot of entrepreneur friends of mine. The first response is, well, what do you get out of it?
What do you get out of it? That's a terrible first response.
But in fairness, this is how entrepreneurs think in general, right?
Yeah, we're running a business. Yeah. How does it help you? Yeah.
And so when we were thinking about that, my thought was, well, we can market this, right? Most companies don't talk to consumers and say, we don't give anything to anybody and we're not involved in a community and we treat our employees crappy, right? Like nobody does that.
Right.
And so when asked, if you ask a company, do you do all these things? Of course, they're going to say yes, right? So it's really hard for a consumer to know. So B Corp is that lever that you can say it's a third party that kind of verifies it, that it's a business that's doing business the way they should. So my thought was, first off, we're already doing these things. So why not have a third party that says it? And we can say, hey, there's this third party that says it. But the thing I didn't really realize was essentially how it moved our employees. As an entrepreneur, you're always talking to employees and trying to get them excited about different things that you think are important or think might be important to them. And some land and some don't. And I was surprised how well this landed with folks. I mean, I would go on sales calls with sales reps, and you could just hear in their voice the emotional attachment to working for a place that was doing things the right way. And we're involved in such a world now where it feels like in order to become a really big company, you can't do these things. It kind of feels that way, right? So when companies do things this way, it's unique. The big companies of the world, if you think about them, they're normally not helpful in all of these areas.
They're usually the opposite of helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's nice. It's a nice way. And employees have really, I think they gravitate to that thought process, especially if you do any research on it, right? If you Google and you spend 5 minutes on what this means, it's pretty moving for consumers and for employees. And at the end of the day, all these things cost money, right? If I'm going to donate, money to charity, that's money I can't invest in other things. And so consumers have to be willing to pay a couple dollars more for companies that are willing to do all this stuff. And we fortunately live in an area where we have consumers that not only respect and appreciate that, but they have extra dollars to be able to do it, right? So it's a nice circular relationship in that way.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. My hat's off to you. And congratulations for just having that business practice in the first place and then going through the Certified B Corp. Look into that myself. Yeah, I 100% agree. Simon Sinek, I believe his name is, right? What's your why? Right. And I have found that with my employees, like they want to know why, not just the big picture stuff. Like, why am I doing this one particular task? What's the why behind everything? I'm an older guy. I didn't grow up like that. All the companies I worked for, there was just do. There was no why. But we're in a different world now. The world's gotten both bigger and smaller. The new generations definitely care. Like you say, climate change and other factors have affected the upcoming generations of younger people. And they want to see, now it's not about profits and shareholder value for the youth of the world. It is about, what are you doing for your community? What are you doing for the planet as a whole? Yes, you could market that. And you should market that. That's part of branding and telling your story. And this is what you're about. This is your philosophy as a company. That's a beautiful story. And my hat's off to you for doing that. So, Randy, my team searches for guests by looking for many different companies, but among solar and plumbing companies, we're looking for companies with great reviews out there. We don't want to bring on guests who run marginal companies and maybe not in the best interest of their community and such. So we found that you had just an overwhelming number of, I think you had 300 plus reviews on Yelp. I forget what you had on Google, a lower number on Google. And for most companies, usually the opposite way around. So tell me, what do you do on Yelp, or to our audience? What's your secret sauce in getting people to go onto Yelp and give you reviews? Do you mind sharing that? You don't have to share it.
The answer is actually not very sexy. I do find that in general, good business and the things that happen is just kind of day in and day out, following a process and doing the things you need to do. And it's wash, rinse, repeat. And as long as you're doing it well and having the consumer front of the mind, this is what a good business is, right? And it's not very sexy, right? The things that gets reported on are revolutionary new products and these crazy new ideas. And let's have this new way of managing people, like things like Zappos does, things like that. Those are all the things that the flashy headlines. But the majority of us out there are just trying to do a good job and trying to take care of a customer. So the answer to that question is, the first thing you have to do is do a good job and take care of the customer, because you're not going to get any good reviews unless you do that, right? And where the contractors generally fall short is doing the last 5% of the work. This is where contractors fall flat on their face. And this was something that when I started a solar company 15 years ago that we were focused on. We were going to finish the work. We're going to have stuff that dragged on. And contractors in all trades struggle with that today still. So complete the work. And then when you complete the work, you can go back to a customer and say, hey, did we do a good job? And just ask. And so it's really do a good job and ask. And if someone says, yeah, you did a good job, then you say, hey, we're a small business. It helps if you go tell the rest of the world that, do something on social media. And it's really as simple as that. Do a good job and ask.
I like it. Well, that's part of your being a certified B Corp too, or your philosophy there. So 100% agree. You could do a great job. You're a plumber, electrician, roofer, whatever your service is. But everything at the end of the day is the quality of the work, the speed of the work, and the cleanliness of the work. Like I've seen many jobs that were done great, even if contractors coming into my own home. But then the very last thing was drilled into drywall in my garage, and they thought it was acceptable to leave a little bit of dust on the floor. It's a tiny little thing, and yet it makes a giant impact on the consumer's viewpoint of just how great that job was done. Or like you're saying, they get 95% of the way I interpret it, and then we're almost done. So now I'm going to jump over to this other project and work on that for a little while before I come back and finish you up. That's bad practice also. So you're right. Do a great job, do great work. And when you're done, ask for how was your experience with us? Do you guys use an automated reputation management system at all, or you're just going out through email? Or
it's manual. And so we do that because it's a personal relationship, right? And so we're going to reach out to them personally and get personal feedback from them. We always make our sales rep go back at the end of the job and talk to the customer at the end. So they do a final walkthrough, essentially, which literally used to be in living room during COVID. Now that's been mostly virtual. But forcing the salesperson to, at the front, if they know they have to go back on the back end, they're less likely to make some promises that aren't kept along the way, right? If they know they have to go back and look the consumer in the eye. And so it helps with that process as well. So yeah, it's the personal relationship. And that 5% that I refer to encompasses a bunch of stuff. It is the picking up of the wire shavings, right? It is that. It's the, oh, shoot, we stepped on the rose bush and broke it. Sorry, Mr. Homeowner, we broke your rose bush. Can I plant another one, right? Can I do something else, right? And all that stuff takes time and energy. And we all have these pressures of, I got to get to the next job or I've got to earn the next dollar. It's in general saying that exists for everyone, exists for Clean Solar like it does everyone. But if we can just pause for a second and finish the 5%, which sometimes is going back to the house and doing something, and sometimes it's just sweeping up the floor.
Right. But if it's your why, so if it's your company philosophy that we're going all out to satisfy this client and do our job perfectly, then it's just part of your employees' mindset to make sure everything, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. So it's part of your why, I would say, personally. We're running a little long, I see. So I'll wrap up a couple of questions. I saw on your website, so for some of our solar guys out there, that you have corporate partnership agreements with some large employers, and then you offer their employees a discount on solar. And I thought that was brilliant. So did you go yourself and reach out to local large employers who are in your area? Or, how did you formulate those relationships?
We did it a couple of ways, and that's been difficult during COVID. But we did it a couple of ways. We did some of that where we would reach out to companies or just take time to network with them in our own. I mentioned I'm a Rotarian, right? So just our normal course of daily walking the earth, and would go in and offer that. And the thought process is, let us talk to 50 employees, and if 10 buy, then that makes sense. So all the way around. So that's the general thought process. Some of the bigger companies are all tied to entities that are essentially doing that. And then they interview solar companies that can then be that company to go into. So like the Apples and the Googles of the world. I don't know Tim Cook or Serge or Larry. Like I don't know them to go knock on their door. But these big companies now have these entities that do this, and then they bring in solar companies or other things for their employees, and they see it as an employee benefit, right? So the employee doesn't have to go somewhere else on their own time. They can do it on work time.
So local companies could reach out to large employers in their area, ask for a human resources department maybe, and see if they're actively seeking employee benefit kind of programs?
Yeah. So for the big companies, there's third-party entities. So if you call 1-800-Google, Google would push you to this third-party entity. If you call $1 million company, right, or a $100 million company, they don't have those. And those are the ones that you would then formulate the relationship with to go in. There's more of those $100 million companies and $1 billion companies.
Yeah, way more. Yeah, sure. And they're more apt to be local and in your neighborhood. Let's see. What would you say if somebody was just starting a solar installation company? What advice would you give them?
I think I'd say that in general, the solar industry is a tough trade because it encompasses two different actual trades, electrical and roofing. Just by that nature, it's doubly difficult. It's also difficult because it's still a newer trade, right? Carpentry and plumbing have been around for 100 plus years, right? This has been around for essentially 15. While the change in what has happened jurisdictionally, like the rules and regulations changing over time, like fire code, like what can happen on a roof and walkways that you have to have on roofs and things like that would be an example of something that changed kind of midstream here in California. Those things have died down a little bit. There's still movement to it. And now that there's batteries, we're going through that all over with batteries, right? Like when are bollards needed in a garage so someone doesn't run their car into a battery? And so just using that as one example, that's kind of front of mind now because that's jurisdictions have different feelings on that particular policy. So because there's all of that, it makes it an exceptionally difficult trade. So if you're going to get into it, you have to be super organized and you have to be super process oriented, right? You've got to be able to understand all the steps along the way. You can't wing it.
Right. Process. And you got to be, sounds like you got to be highly adaptive and be able to fit that into your processes and now change your SOPs accordingly, which might happen kind of often, it sounds like.
It does. And one change can have a domino effect on the whole process down the road, right? You might have to, let's use the bollard example, right? So now if I have to do that, I now have to come all the way back to the front and my sales team now has to figure out where a bollard's going to go. And now can a car fit in a garage, right? If there's a bollard there, right? So, and all the steps along the way that has to be kind of checked. And you have to be willing, you have to be a type of contractor that likes change, that gets their juices going, that change is happening, and you can be creative and innovative with what happens. For me personally, I like that. I mentioned I've got a roofing company as well. And the roofing company is pretty status quo. And frankly, from a business perspective, it's a better business. It's easier to make money in that space.
It's more predictable.
Yeah, because everything's more predictable. But it doesn't get the juices going because nothing really changes. The change is really minimal in that space. Where here, something changes and you go, aha, we can be better at that than the competitor because now we're going to do this, that, and the other to make sure that this isn't a hiccup along the way. And that kind of thing, I think, becomes part of the culture. People are always looking to try to, if you're a process-driven company, always trying to get out all the problems along the way, the employees will go, new problem. We need to fix this somewhere along the way. And everyone's kind of minded in that way to not accept little bumps in the road. And they see the little bumps in the road and help change the whole process along the way instead of just kind of coming in and banging the same nail every single day, right?
Right. And it sounds like you encourage that amongst your employees, right? So we encourage you to find the bumps along our SOPs and we'll reward you for making them more efficient. Yes?
I'm involved in all the orientations we do with every single employee that comes in. And one of the things I always mention is about empowerment. I talk about empowerment, how it's lacking in the workplace today. People, the general human that comes into the workplace is looking to be led down a path. And we encourage people to say, we'll train you to do something. And then don't be afraid to make some decisions, be empowered, communicate, let us know where the problems are. And if you make a mistake, you're never going to get yelled at. If you make the same mistake 3 times, maybe, right? But don't be afraid to make a mistake. And that's where really the empowerment thing comes in. If people feel like they're going to move forward and it's okay to make that mistake, they'll just generally do a better job and it's more rewarding for the soul.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're valuing their input. They're the one in that job every single day. And they have an idea. Hey, Randy, I think if we did this and this, that would shorten the time, whatever the idea is. And so now they feel like more of a team player, part of the company, instead of here's my way and don't you dare vary from it. That doesn't get you anywhere. Any resources or books you recommend to our listeners out there that might help them along their path?
The resources, I would say anyone in the solar industry needs to be involved in the trade organization. So in California, it's CALSA. I've mentioned that before. So calsa.org, I think it is. Look up California Solar and Storage and you'll find them. The reason that's important in the solar space is because we have all these battles going on, there's an entity that needs to fight that. And that entity needs membership and needs dollars to be able to hire folks to go out there and have these battles, right? Because PG&E and other utilities are hugely funded. So we're a member and I happen to run the Bay Area chapter of it. And so that's been very important, not only for the industry, but for us as well. It keeps me in the know a bit on what's going on in the industry. And just as far as a book, the Bill Gates book that came out about climate change, I read, and we now actually offer it to all of our customers at their final walkthrough. We ask them if they'd like that book and we'll buy them the book. It's really a layman's look at what can be done different and how we should be thinking about things.
I wish the whole energy and pollution thing, of course, global warming, of course, major topic. It also opened the door for the naysayers to make it a complex argument. I wish that instead of using that argument, especially in the energy world, we would have just said, well, we have whatever it is, 800,000 respiratory diseases per year in America, and X number of cancer cases per year, asthma, all these things that we can directly contribute to CO2 gases. So part of me likes that simpler argument, and nobody can argue with that. Like if you stand behind a gas-powered automobile and put yourself in whatever it was, 1870 or 18, would you say that this was an intelligent thing to mass produce while you're breathing in those fumes? So we should go solar just for healthcare, and that'll ripple out to the health of the planet as well. There's so many other things that affect the health of the planet as well. Any question you wish I had asked you at all, Randy?
One other thing that's kind of been on my mind lately that might be important here. So we're talking a little bit about the battle between solar and utilities are getting better about that battle. One of the things that's starting to happen in the space now is they're starting to use the unions to be the mouthpiece for utilities. And they're doing that because utilities don't have much of a mouthpiece, because who likes PG&E right now? There's not much to like, and politicians don't like them because they're burning down the state, and utilities generally aren't liked. Even if they do a perfect job in their world, people just generally don't like them. So it makes it tough for them to speak out. And so they're using unions, and unions have a lot of power, which is good, but they have the relationship with PG&E, which gives them a lot of business, right? So there's a significant monetary connection there. And so I'm not necessarily a pro or against unions. I actually think there's a good place for unions. And I think the solar industry, where I'm going to come full circle with this, is that part of the argument being made now is that the jobs in solar that are being created are not high dollar jobs. They're lower dollar jobs. So creating jobs is a good thing, but creating a person making $50 an hour, that kind of job creation is better at the end of the day, right? So the solar industry needs to do a better job at that overall. And the union is trying to kind of push that, and the solar needs to kind of keep up with that a little bit. And there's this push and pull here with the strength that unions have. And many people believe in the concept of unions. And so the fight that they're having here, a lot of politicians will then cite, hey, these entities need to pay more for their employees. And we absolutely do. And yet the issue ultimately is you're dealing with consumers, and there's a lot of people in the space. There's hundreds of solar installers. So that push and pull of how much do we actually charge is really an issue with what a customer is willing to pay. And at the same time, if consumers are willing to pay more, so we talked about the B Corp thing before, right? Consumers are willing to do that for the companies that do that. And Clean Solar does pay more for our labor, hence the reason we're B Corp. But if the industry can do a better job overall with not always trying to squeeze more out of that dollar from the employee and do a better job like unions do to get more wages. And I don't think things like prevailing wage makes any sense in residential work, but getting a little more wage for those folks is huge, because at the end of the day, the installer, the blue collar worker, is the hardest working person out there, right? They're on roofs. It's 20 degrees hotter on a roof than it is on the ground. And they're crawling attics and in under buildings and stuff. These folks should be higher paid, just like school teachers, right? We don't value those businesses or those trades quite enough. So I hope that as an industry, and since we're kind of talking industry stuff here, I hope we think about that as we're hiring and not be afraid to pay that extra $1 or $2 or whatever it is to let that guy who's going to crawl under the house and bend conduit all day long, he doesn't have to go to McDonald's for dinner, that he can go to Chili's instead, right?
I like that. Share the wealth with your employees. So I didn't know that. So the unions of the workers for the utility companies are being used as a lobbying force to the public.
Yeah, so there was a bill, it was AB 1139, you can look it up, that was proposed by the second most powerful Democratic congressperson down in San Diego, and she was trying to push this through. It was basically short-circuiting net energy metering 3. We talked about energy metering 3 before. It was doing a lot of the things that is going to naturally come out in the conversation energy metering 3 and short-circuiting it. It was complex, so I'm simplifying a bit, but there was a powerful Democratic senator behind it, pushing it, authoring it. And so because she's tight with the unions, which again, that's okay. There's nothing the matter with that. But not understanding the full circle of it, of what she was really doing. If that bill would have passed, sales of solar would have gone down 90%.
Wow. So her argument was union workers for utility companies were better paying jobs than solar installers. Is that the gist of it?
It was multiple fold. One of them has some truth to it in the wages paid by unions. So all this work should be done by unions. Okay. The problem is, realistically, there's not enough of that. And there's not going to be enough in a decade, right? And how fast are we really fighting global warming, right? So can we really wait? So there's a little bit of flawed logic, but there is a little bit of truth. The other one is entirely flawed logic, and it's the wrong way of looking at statistics. And one of the other argument in this particular case was saying that only the rich are buying solar. There's this narrative out there that only rich are buying solar, and it's just not the case. If you look at the statistics, it is early adopters, certainly more rich people doing it.
That's for everything.
Yeah. And so it's now at a point where there's more average income or lesser average income buying solar than there is wealthy. And so you can find all these statistics out there, but it's kind of looking at that the wrong way. And so it goes in line with democratic thinking, right? The democratic policy thinking of taking care of people and paying them well and taking care of underprivileged, right? Rich buying and not. And it's part of it's a false narrative. And the outcome is really devastating and not what you really want to happen. So at the end of the day, if AB 1139 would have got passed, it would have gotten repealed somewhere along the way. And companies like Clean Solar just have to cross their fingers that we can make it to that standpoint.
So you got these dangerous, sort of misinformed or not fully informed people out there. What do they say? Good intentions, or I forget that phrase. So potentially good intentions in the beginning, but lack of data, knowledge, experience would have been devastating to not only the field, but again, pollution, the state, global warming, everything. It would trickle throughout it all. Wow, interesting. So beware of state policies and bills and dive deep before you vote, basically.
Get educated, for sure.
Which is all of our responsibility anyway. Good stuff. So tell me, Randy, where can our listeners connect with you online if they would like to?
We're Clean Solar, so it's cleansolar.com is our website. We have LinkedIn pages and Facebook pages and all that stuff. You can just look up Clean Solar. The roofing entity is called Clean Roofing, so it's cleanroofing.com also. And yeah, we'd love to connect with the community and appreciate the time that we've had to chat here today, Mark.
Yeah, same here. And for those who didn't catch it, Randy's company is up in San Jose, and services the whole Bay Area pretty much, yes?
Yes, all the entire Bay Area.
Good stuff. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Randy. Really appreciate it. Great information for our audience, so thank you there.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you bet. We hope our listeners got helpful value from the interview. Thanks for sharing your time with us. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast so you get notified of future episodes. Feel free to share this episode on your social channels. We'll see you all in the next episode. Good luck out there and create a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Battle Plan Marketing Podcast. To power up your home service business, for show notes, visit battleplanmarketing.com/podcast. If you enjoyed our show, please share it on social. Until next time.